We are talking Project Z, or I guess you'd say Project Z if you're from the States. So this is actually a Norwegian kind of found footage movie that actually came out in 2021, but it's being put out in the States in 2023. So what's the story? Well, it focuses on a group of student filmmakers who are making a zombie movie, and they've gone out to this kind of abandoned hotel somewhere in the wilderness and are making a movie there. And the film they're making is actually a zombie film. Along the way, they notice a meteor crash landing on, on the kind of like the area where they're kind of filming. And one of the guys goes and kind of, checks it out and touches it. And we all know where this is going. So in the meantime, the rest of the film crew are kind of making this zombie film, and it's essentially told from the perspective of a behind-the-scenes kind of footage that is being made. Although we do see sequences of the kind of finished film within a film, so to speak, and that does take up a portion of it. And eventually, obviously, the kind of the zombie movie that they're making actually ends up becoming a reality, because this alien kind of presence which has come down on this kind of meteor actually it starts to affect the cast and crew, turn them into kind of zombie-like kind of creatures, but a little different from the ones we're seeing kind of in the actual movie. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works with Project Z. So as I've said, this is kind of a found footage movie because it doesn't kind of interject different kind of styles. It primarily is a found footage movie, with the bulk of the story being this kind of behind the scenes kind of style, but we actually do see sequences of the air quotes movie within a movie in its finished form. So there's a couple of sequences of traditionally found kind of horror movies, which is actually meant to be the film that they have actually kind of made. So we do get a few scenes of traditionally filmed sequences all about zombies, but that's actually meant to be the kind of the actual finished product. So it does have a little bit of a kind of variety, and I guess it kind of makes sense, albeit these finished sequences have all got kind of VFX and music and all that added to it, which would all be done in post, not just like that they just filmed it. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. But it's an interesting kind of premise, and it's almost like a kind of peek behind the curtain of the independent kind of like filmmaking methods and things like that, which is kind of quite fun. When we actually do get the kind of the sequences that involve the kind of the real threat, this kind of actual kind of zombie alien kind of like threat, and really the last kind of like 25 minutes of the film, there are some sequences there that I think are genuinely quite kind of spooky, and really kind of then properly lean into that kind of that found footage aesthetic as a kind of a pure horror. There are elements of kind of comedy in it beforehand, but that last kind of 25 minutes outside of the very end of it, which kind of goes back to the kind of the film within the film, it is really actually quite effective and kind of looks pretty good. And the idea here of these kind of like this alien parasite kind of affecting people by actually attaching itself to the back of the head gives it a kind of a zombie-like appearance, but not like your traditional like Romero style zombies. So it's not exactly the same as the zombies that we've been seeing in the actual kind of films. It gives it a little bit of a point of difference there. I think the cast are all pretty good. Obviously, this is a film primarily spoken in Norwegian. There are a few sequences spoken in English, but mostly it's in kind of Norwegian. It's always a little bit difficult to kind of really tell the acting from a foreign language movie, but it seems good. It seems fine to me. So that was all pretty good. And VFX wise, I think the movie is pretty good for that in that respect. And if you're like a fan of film studies, I think this might appeal to you, because obviously it does have that kind of that behind the scenes aesthetic, and kind of the obviously the making of a film within a film gives it that kind of that extra added element to it, which I think may be of interest, especially if you are interested in the making of horror films and things like that. There is some kind of quite fun kind of dialogue sequences, and as I said, the movie does have somewhat comedic kind of overtones, particularly before the cast and crew really understand that there's actually a legitimate danger there, and the kind of shenanigans that are kind of going on. But shenanigans is also the problem here, I would say, because this movie really is like a fictional behind-the-scenes look at a movie that doesn't exist for the first hour of the movie, and it really only turned into a legitimate horror film for the last kind of 25 minutes or so. So you genuinely feel like you're watching like people involved in film production fanny around for like an hour before the actual plot kind of really kind of kicks in. Yes, we see the kind of the meteorite crash land, obviously in the kind of that first hour and stuff, and people going touching it, but there's no real consequences from that until we get to that kind of like that last 25 minutes or so. So the bulk of this running time is this kind of the making of this fictional movie. So you feel like you're genuinely making or watching a making of documentary for a film that doesn't actually exist, which may not be the most interesting. And I have to be honest with you, I think they spend too long. And there's scenes here that are very extended. There's a sequence where they're trying to capture a particular kind of sequence in like a minivan, and it just goes on forever. I mean, I guess that is trying to show you that yes, these sequences do take a long time to fill, and that's fine if, you know, to sort of add a bit of information about how the filmmaking process works. But as we are watching it as consumers, wanting to watch this for a narrative thread, I've got to be honest with you, I think the pacing here is a little weak. I also think some of the kind of the conceit here of the found footage movie being intermixed with sequences from this kind of air quote finished movie, again, it doesn't really make sense because the sequences we're seeing are all perfectly edited. It's not like you're watching the dailies or anything like that. You're watching, you know, finished footage which has been edited, you know, color corrected, music overlaid on it, VFX put on it. So it doesn't really make sense why you'd be watching that in the context of, you know, people looking back at what they've just filmed, if that makes sense. So it looks effective, but it doesn't make sense, if you see what I mean. There's a lot of characters here, and many of them I didn't really feel like you kind of got to know about. There was, for example, there's like the female director, and her kind of boyfriend is having an affair with someone else. I actually didn't realise they were two separate people because they kind of look the same, if I'm honest. So there's very little kind of like characterization on these different characters, or some of them at least, that you really don't, they just don't register as kind of genuine kind of characters, because we have such a large kind of cast of, of people, and then a lot of the time they're in kind of like, costume if they're, acting like zombies within the film, and things like this. So it gets a little bit kind of, you're just watching a bunch of kind of random people on screen in a making of film of a film that doesn't actually exist, so it's kind of not all that interesting to start with. So this movie, I think, in its inception, is kind of flawed. I mean, like I've said, that last 20-25 minutes, I think is quite strong for a found footage conceit, but then I think it actually undercuts it with kind of an epilogue sequence, which is meant to be a little bit of a joke, but I actually have to say I'd rather it didn't have that personally. So it's choices were made in this film, which I personally feel undercuts the film in its integrity, makes it not a particularly kind of interesting viewing experience. There may be those among you who like the kind of like the behind the scenes machinations of what's kind of going on a kind of a film project, and might enjoy that kind of like that melodrama, that kind of the cast and crew are having behind the scenes and things like that. But I'd wager that's probably not what you're going to pick this movie up for. It's kind of like ultimately becomes a little bit dull and meandering at times. Even though when I think it does settle down and have some proper horror in it, I think it actually does it relatively well. It's just too short, too late in the game, and you feel this should have been kind of like incorporated much earlier and had a little bit more kind of involved in it, because it's very short, that sequence, to be honest with you, because like I said, it kind of goes back to this kind of meta side of things towards the end. So I have to be honest with you, I think there are elements of this movie that are well made, but there's a kind of a narrative piece on its own. Do you know what? I mean, I'm going to be really kind and give this movie a 5 out of 10, but I actually think it's probably, technically speaking, it's a relatively kind of well-made film, but the narrative here is I think bad decisions were made on it. I don't even think it was just like unintentionally kind of like, just, you know, didn't turn out very well. This is actually how I think the movie was meant to be made. I just don't think it really works. The inception of this idea, I think, is flawed. But, like I said, what we do see of the horror stuff is good. The acting is fine. I think it's relatively kind of well put together. So I'll give it a 5 out of 10. And it does have a little bit of originality, I guess. But, you know, bear this in mind if you do check this film out. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.